If I ask you what historical events defined the 19th century, many of you will likely think of the expansion of Napoleon Bonaparte's empire, the Civil War in the USA, or even the independence of many Latin American countries such as Mexico. However, among all these historical events, there is one in particular that I want you to pay close attention to: Luddism. Luddism was a movement that spread throughout Europe and was made up of people who had a very, very curious goal: destroy technology, attack factories, and eliminate any trace of the modern machinery that was beginning to flourish at that time. The Luddites, who were the people who were part of this anti-technology group, were afraid that the machines would put them out of work. They thought that if they destroyed them, they could save themselves from being condemned to unemployment. Be that as it may, the point is that the Luddites failed. Their social revolutions and attacks on factories failed, and only a few years after the start of their attacks, there was no trace of them again. Or at least, not until now. So what if I told you that the Luddites might be about to go back to their old ways? Take a look.
Neo-Luddism. Will anti-technology make a comeback in 2020? Advances in artificial intelligence are not well seen by Neo-Luddites in a labour market where there is more and more space for robots.
Let's be clear, the Luddites of the 19th century were completely wrong. The appearance of factories, machines, and technology did not cause European workers to lose their jobs on a large scale. Quite the opposite, in fact. Machines made it possible to improve the standard of living, created new jobs, and made it possible for humans to enjoy better and better cars, clothes, and appliances. Technology was a blessing for human beings, that's for sure, but what if this time it was different? In other words, today we are on the verge of an enormous technological change that could completely transform the way we understand the world. We have seen how artificial intelligence has been able to make works of art with an impressive artistic level, capable of replacing practically any professional. We have also seen how ChatGPT-style intelligences are now able to hold conversations, process information, and answer all kinds of questions, even better than a human being. Well, more or less, but keep in mind that we are at a very early stage. In some ways, it seems that modern technology may be about to supplant workers far more easily than ever before. And why is this important? Well, it is important because it is a notable difference with respect to what happened in the 19th century. In other words, in the 19th century, machines were applied to very specific sectors, to very mechanized, very physical, and very routine sectors, but technology did not go much further than that. Let's say that at that time, the substitution of machines for workers only affected very specific jobs. However, today's robots, modern artificial intelligence, could go much further. We could be about to enter a phase where technology is better than workers in all aspects, both physical and mental, and therefore each and every one of us would be in danger of losing our jobs. Yes, even me. It doesn't matter if you've studied a lot. If you are the best at what you do, a machine can do it better than you, and at a much lower cost. You don't believe me? Take a look at this news.
47% of today's jobs will disappear in the next 25 years.
According to The Future of Employment, a report by Oxford University professors Carl Frey and Michael Osborne, almost half of all current jobs will disappear in the next 3 decades. Or to put it another way, it is no longer just that artificial intelligence may be a threat, but that it seems to be an imminent threat to everyone, arriving faster than ever, and one to which we will not have time to react. So, Visualeconomik viewers, now it is time to ask ourselves a few questions. Is it possible that the new Luddism is right? Should we protect ourselves from the advance of new technologies? Are we facing a massive and imminent danger of losing our jobs? Today on Visualeconomik, we will tell you all about it, so stay tuned. Let's start by being clear. On the subject of Luddism, that is, on the subject of technology stealing jobs from workers, there are many, many, many myths. We are going to put a few of them on the table right now. I'm so glad I have a table now. The first myth, for example, is that when a company adopts machines or robots, it no longer needs its workers and can therefore fire them. However, this is not necessarily true. In fact, there are many examples of companies where the exact opposite has happened. Without going any further, we can quickly talk about the case of Ford. Ford was one of the first automobile assembly plants in the world. In the beginning, Ford only manufactured handcrafted, handmade cars, very personalized, and painstakingly produced, almost as if they were works of art. However, over time, Ford changed the way it produced cars. It went from manufacturing them by hand to mass production, and in huge assembly lines, with modern machines and technology. According to the Luddite theory, when Ford abandoned the handmade manufacture of cars and introduced machines, this should have led to the dismissal of most of the workers, because they were no longer needed. However, the opposite happened. Take a look. Since the implementation of new technology at the Ford plant in 1908, the number of workers at the plant increased from 450 to more than 18,000. In other words, technology not only did not destroy jobs, but it multiplied them by more than 40 times. Well, the truth is that this phenomenon was not unique to the Ford factory. On the contrary, it is a fairly common result. Take a look. In a study that looked at a multitude of companies between the years 1990 and 2016, it was found that companies that adopted robots and advanced technology hired vastly more new workers than companies that did not robotize. What's more, companies that did not robotize ended up destroying jobs, not creating them. The opposite of what Luddite theory states. The question is, how does it make sense that the companies with the most machines and the most automated ones are precisely the ones that generate the most employment? There are two main reasons. The first reason is that the most automated companies can increase their production far more than non-automated companies. Returning to the Ford case, the moving assembly line allowed them to go from producing only a few handcrafted cars a year to producing tens of thousands. And of course, by producing so many cars, Ford had to set up new factories and work lines to be able to supply the production line, hire more salespeople, as well as administration and manual labor personnel. In short, you could say that machines made it possible to build each car with fewer workers. But as many more cars began to be produced, the number of workers also skyrocketed. Beyond that, the second reason robotic companies hire more is that they are able to decimate the competition. By having new technology, robotized companies can produce more cheaply and, therefore, can lower prices to eliminate competition. And do you realize what this means? It means that the only companies that end up laying off workers because of technological progress are the companies that do not robotize and modernize. Companies that often end up closing because they cannot reduce prices enough. Once again, the opposite of the Luddite theory. But well, leaving the latter behind, the truth is that the Luddite theory has another major flaw that is not usually taken into account. As we have just seen, one of the main effects of robotization is that companies that robotize can lower their prices significantly. And what happens when prices go down? It means that consumers can save more money. And what can they do with that money? Spend it elsewhere, creating new jobs and new opportunities. For example, when the internet became popular, we started buying our trips on our computer. That led to the disappearance of most travel agencies and the loss of many jobs. Perhaps people who used to work in travel agencies lost their jobs, but now there are a lot of programmers working on websites that sell airline tickets or hotel reservations. Of course, not only have new digital startups created new jobs, but thanks to the savings from being able to buy travel online, we have more money to spend elsewhere, helping to create new jobs that would not otherwise exist. So you see, although technological progress may destroy some jobs, it is also capable of creating new ones. The question is, what swings the balance? Jobs gained or jobs destroyed? The answer we can intuit thanks to a study that analyzed how robotization affected jobs in 19 countries over the past 40 years. What this study found was that industries that robotized, and particularly companies that did not adapt, effectively destroyed jobs. But at the same time, the suppliers to these industries, that is, what would be the programmers in the travel agency example just mentioned, created more jobs than were destroyed. And there's more. As consumers were able to save money thanks to lower prices, this helped create even more jobs. In short, job destruction was only a small part of all the new jobs that were created. Automation ended up creating jobs, not destroying them. But what if this time, what if it's different? What if no new jobs are created? After all, the studies we have just mentioned only take into account the last few years. Maybe current artificial intelligence will change the trend. Perhaps new technologies will be much more aggressive in the future than they have been so far. So what if the situation this time is different and automation does destroy more jobs than it creates? Well, let's take a look at it.
A paradigm shift?
Suppose for a moment that robotization does destroy more jobs than it creates. In that case, one point that is not usually raised is that destroying work does not have to mean the same as destroying jobs. Let me explain. Imagine that a factory buys a super robot and stops needing 50% of its workforce. One thing the factory owner can do is lay off half of the workers, but it could also do something else, which is to reduce working hours and not lay anyone off. And you know what? Thanks to technological advancements, this is exactly what we have seen over the past few years. thanks to technology, life is getting better and better in developed countries. By working fewer and fewer hours, we are able to maintain our standard of living and even improve it. One of the consequences of robotization could be precisely that. We could have less need to work. Robots could be so productive that by working just a few hours a week, we could produce enough to satisfy our needs. Once again, this is not a prediction or a pipe dream. It is something that has been happening for the last 200 years. Now then, if this is true, if with experience in hand, we can say that technology does not seem to destroy jobs, how do you explain this news item that we mentioned earlier?
47% of today's jobs will disappear in the next 25 years.
Well, let's see. The study on which this news story is based is a study that does not take into account that although there are tasks of certain jobs that can be automated, other tasks cannot be automated. For example, a teacher could automate the correction of exams with artificial intelligence, but in the short and medium term, the rapport with the students, the physical presence, and the in-person help could hardly be replaced. Let's just say, in certain jobs, there are some tasks that can be automated, but others that simply cannot. The point is that the study cited in the previous news item did not take this into account, and that is why its results showed that almost 50% of jobs in many countries could disappear. However, if we subtract from this percentage those jobs where only some specific tasks could be automated, but not others that are very important, the result is that the real danger of automation is reduced to only 9%. Be that as it may, yes, I know what many of you are probably thinking. 9%? Still a very high percentage. In other words, 1 in 10 people will lose their jobs. What's more, technology is advancing faster and faster. It is possible that in just a few years, with the boom in artificial intelligence, many more people will be affected than predicted. Perhaps the problem is not even the destruction of jobs, but that it will come so fast that we will not have time to adapt. Well, there may be something to that, but on the other hand, I don't think it should alarm us too much. Do you want to know why? Well, take a look at this. What you're looking at is a map depicting jobs in technologically advanced sectors across Europe. As you can see, the differences between regions and countries are enormous. According to the authors of the study from which this graph is taken, if the most backward regions of Europe, such as Spain or Greece, were to catch up with the most advanced regions, such as Germany or Ireland, they would need many years to adapt technologically. So what does all this have to do with the threat of robotization? Well, what you have to understand is that automating industries and advancing technologically is neither a quick nor a simple process. The proof is that backwards countries remain backward for a long time. At the end of the day, technology requires huge amounts of investment that is not often available. It requires people trained sufficiently to implement it. And above all, it requires flexible governments that provide business security and do not hinder the process, something that, fortunately or unfortunately, does not typically happen. In short, even if the most advanced technologies were available, they would take a very long time to be implemented. And the danger that we would not have time to adapt does not seem really important in theory. Although if this doesn't convince you, let me give you a real life example. Do you know what year the first functional electric motor was invented? In 1837 by Thomas Davenport. And do you know how much time passed between the invention of the electric motor and the moment when factories like Ford began to make industrial use of electricity in a really profitable way? No less than 70 years. Although it may seem to us today that technology has always moved very fast, the great advances in history have taken a long time to be implemented. In any case, and in view of all this, it is very likely that technology will not take away our jobs, and those it does take away may not happen as quickly as we think. But let's play a game of economic make-believe. Let's imagine that 1,000 years go by and a robot capable of doing absolutely everything is invented. A robot capable of being better than a human in all aspects, including personal, cognitive, and all other aspects. Well, in that case, there would be two options. The first is that there would be unlimited robots. Therefore, there would be unlimited production. And it would not make sense to talk about work, or economy, or anything. In that world, you would just need to ask for something and the robots could produce it for us. It would be something like having unlimited robot slaves, which, honestly, in a world of finite natural resources such as ours, does not seem like a feasible possibility. The second option, therefore, would be for robots to exist, but for them to be limited. In that case, robots would not be able to do everything, but they would work where they were more productive. At the same time, we humans would dedicate ourselves to work where robots, given their limited numbers, would not be able to reach. If you think about it, this is a bit like what happens with factories in underdeveloped countries. In other words, a garment factory in Germany would probably produce better and more efficiently than a factory in Bangladesh. However, German workers are not unlimited, so they only work in companies where they can be more productive and where they can earn more money, in car companies, for example. And therefore, the preference is to send the less productive factories to other countries. This is what is known as relative specialization, and possibly something similar would happen with robots and artificial intelligence. Now, at this point, one last question. Does everything we have seen mean that artificial intelligence and robots should not concern us at all? Does it mean that neo-Luddism will fail in the same way as the original Luddism? Well, the truth is that although in terms of work it does not seem that we should worry too much, there is one problem that could be much more realistic and more serious. Here, we're talking about inequality. Or, to put it another way, in a world with a high degree of robotization, how would wealth be distributed? Would entrepreneurs become much wealthier at the cost of exploiting machines? Could technological evolution be the cause of enormous increase in inequality that we have seen in developed countries in recent years? Well, Visualeconomik viewers, we will answer these questions in a future video here on this channel, as this one has already become long enough. Until then, the questions are for you. Do you think that technology has significant dangers that we should consider? Do you think that the neo-Luddites may have a point? What do you expect us to tell you in the next video? You can leave me your answers in the comments. And as always, don't forget that here on Visualeconomik, we release new videos every week. So subscribe to this channel and hit the little bell down there so you don't miss any of our updates. If you like the video, please go ahead and like it, and I'll see you in the next one. All the best, see you next time.